Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Near Memo with Mike Blumenthal, the lovely and talented Mike Blumenthal, and me, Greg Sterling. No guests today. We have to take a break from the sequence of guests, and we'll have more guests coming up for through the year. But today we will be talking about Gemini 3. We're going to start out with some of the new Maps AI features that were announced this week. We'll be talking about ads in AI mode, Gemini 3, and the sort of competitive situation now between Google and ChatGPT now that Gemini 3 is getting such positive acclaim. So, Mike, why don't you jump in with the new Google AI Maps features?
All right, so I'm going to do a screen share for those of you who are watching this on YouTube to see. So Google announced several new features for Maps. One is Know Before You Go, and the other is the ability to use a reviewer alias or nickname to be a little more anonymously reviewed. This Know Before You Go, what's interesting to me is several things. Maps is often a prequel to the big show on the main search and browsers. So the fact that we're seeing it here indicates it's certainly being considered for the main search results. And I've seen tests of it in the main search results as well. What's interesting is
Know Before You Go is not a new feature.
not a new feature, right?
Right.
But it isn't consistent
Right.
in search. It sometimes shows up, it sometimes doesn't. But what's interesting, if you're looking at this on YouTube, is the extreme highlighting. This is more obvious than any ad they've ever put out there. A pale blue background where everything else on the map is either gray or white, so it stands out for that. It's right below the photos, so it's very high in the design. And then on this Know Before You Go, there's three. It's not always three, but at this point, there's three answers, and then a small call to action beside each answer. And then below that, chips, one of which is a very dark blue, ask a question. So you can go into any one of these things. Locals rave about their baking, calling it the best in town. Even Olean locals are impressed with the Texas hot dog here. I'm not sure why that's significant to whoever posted it, but you go in and it actually brings up the review from that. Apparently people in Olean are particular about their Texas hots. But when you go in to ask a question, it then brings up, in this case, 10 pre-populated questions, and you can ask something in addition. Let's say how
It's a version of People Also Ask.
it is. Let's see how it does with this, if it knows this. I'm asking how long they've been at this particular location. It says 2021, where they previously had been in another location. So they pulled this in real time fairly quickly from the Olean Times Herald. So it's interesting for its interface design. It's interesting its placement on the page, and it's interesting because the top two elements on this page are AI generated above things like open hours and address and website and
Right.
phone number.
Busyness. Yeah.
You're right. Now those things do have menus at chips at the top, as does photos and reviews. But in terms of the content, it's become the most obvious content. So
so let's talk about where it comes from. It comes from reviews. It comes from the website. It comes from third-party sources. The Know Before You Go.
right. The question I asked was no reason for it to know it as a normal part of the knowledge graph, but it went out to the Olean Times Herald and found it fairly quickly. So the speed, I think, was impressive. If you also, and so it will find it wherever it needs to find it. Obviously, the pre-done ones might even be faster because it caches those answers. We've talked about Q&A. Q&A was brought out, I think, in 2017. It's been deprecated on desktop search and mobile search in the browser, but it's still here way down the page on Google Maps. Why they're keeping it in Google Maps, the Q&A feature, I don't really know, because
It's like you're hoarding relative. They can't throw anything away.
well, it could be. Its functionality is largely replaced by Know Before You Go and Ask a Question.
We should remark that in the horizontal navigation at the top, the lime green chips um, are they privilege ask, you know, it's in the sort of first position on the left after directions. Yeah. So anyway, they are really pushing these kind of AI features in maps. This is the second set of announcements in basically a couple of weeks. And some of this stuff is very valuable, I think. The ability to ask free text questions that are very personal, specific, that you can't quickly get answers to through the structured data that's otherwise available, I think is really valuable. I think that they're doing, you know, to a point that you made earlier about this being some sort of test bed or beta environment for, the big show. Mobile search is at least as much as desktop search. I mean, it varies category by category, but the
Right. But
proportion
map search isn't as much as
as
mobile
search
browser
search.
search.
Yes,
Right.
yes, that's true. So some of this stuff is really useful, and they're of course playing around and trying to work out what people respond to. But this UI that we're looking at, and people who are listening to this only in audio only won't have the benefit of seeing this. But this UI by itself, I just think is becoming increasingly cluttered. This is the problem of search itself, that they are jamming so much stuff in here. They've got multiple navs, they've got, multiple modules, and it's getting, I mean, they'll clean it up presumably at some point, but it's just a mess. The
It's
multiple
interesting too,
colors.
just the top green chips that you mentioned. Once you start scrolling, those reappear at the
Right.
bottom. So they're persistent throughout, whereas all the other, as are the menu, reviews, photos. But there's three left, right scrolls in the first screen view: photos, overview, menu, directions. Those are all left, right scrolls. So there's a lot. It's a very, very intense interface. I agree.
It's just too busy. It's too busy. I mean, you would think, again, Google is trying things out. They're trying to expose people to these AI features to get them engaged with them. So I get all that, but it's just very messy. It's very cluttered. And you would think that they would do a bunch of user testing. I mean, I'm sure they're doing it, and figure out what are the most valuable things that people want, and put those in a more prominent position versus all the stuff that they have. It's just, I don't.
Right. They've consolidated virtually. They used to have a bunch of apps, and they've consolidated into the Google app, which is the web, and the maps. And they've
Yeah.
included things which used to be separate. For example, business management and contribution management. And those things used to be separate apps, and now they're built into this app. So not only is it too much map information, it's too much to do, which is a good segue into this new review name feature, right? Google announced simultaneously that they would allow users to create new nicknames in Google Map, in the Map app. This feature I don't think is available on the desktop. I couldn't find it anyways in the brief search. But watch how hard it is to get to that feature to change your name. So at first you have to click on your photo, and then you have to click on your profile. Then you have to click on edit profile once your profile comes up. And then you have to select a little checkbox for this new feature, use a custom display and name, and then you can create a nickname and it does require an image before you can save it. So this is 3 clicks plus 2 fields and a photo. It's buried. It's one of these features that's going to be deprecated before anybody learns about it.
Yeah. 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 It's very curious. I mean, it's sort of a throwaway in a certain sense, but it's very curious that they're doing this now. I mean, what would motivate them to do this at this moment?
It could
there's a
be
bunch of
privacy. It could be that they, as they integrate their workspace stuff and their public facing stuff, it could be a privacy thing.
well we
Google
can
claims it won't
we can
affect their current
yeah, with
review
review fraud.
moderation. And I
Right.
agree with that because a username, as opposed to a back end piece of information, Google doesn't look at usernames in terms of their moderation. Their moderation is based on review content and metadata like visitation
Hmm.
data that they have access to. That they still are going to do that moderation. We know last year they had almost 1 billion reviews accepted, 250 million rejected. We also know that there's still probably 20% of the review corpus is fake reviews or bad reviews or
Right.
whatever.
There's a spectrum of problems.
And
Yeah.
there's false positives. Those realities, I don't think are going to change because of an alias. It might, as you mentioned in your newsletter, allow people to leave more negative reviews than they would have felt comfortable doing. Like I locally in a small town typically feel uncomfortable leaving a really negative review. And so I
Well,
have
right.
a sock puppet, right?
Yeah, I mean, my initial reaction to it when Barry Schwartz told me about it yesterday morning, without sort of thinking it through carefully, was that it would be another aid to fraudsters. But I do think that the connection, I mean, people create fake profiles to do review fraud, so that's really the level at which review fraud is operating. Less so about the public facing name. But there are a lot of arguments in favor of anonymity online around privacy and other values. But why are they doing this now? It makes no sense for them to do this now. And I do think that when people have anonymity online, they are more inclined to do things that are unaccountable, or that they would not do if they were face to face with a person, or if they had to identify themselves, publicly. And it reduces transparency, which is a bad thing.
And the reduction of transparency impacts the business because they can't use reviews as much for customer care and business intelligence because
Because they
they
can't validate that those were actual
they
customers.
can't validate. Now, in some countries, it is a requirement that the user have been a customer of the business to leave a review. So it makes that process a little harder. So like in Germany, France, where those are laws, it makes it a little harder, although I don't think it'll slow the legal process down. But it certainly makes it harder in this country and the other thing is that many businesses don't understand. You go into the forums, they all say, oh, I don't recognize this person's name. But that's not even a Google requirement. It's never been a requirement that the person did business with your business. They could have stepped in dog poo outside your front door and left a review. That's a totally legitimate interaction with your business that Google would consider within the terms of service. So it's going to confuse that even more. One hope I would have is that when a user, a long-term user, has an obscene name, Google, for whatever reason, has no ability to remove that, or very little ability to remove that username or change that username. And so that creates this dynamic in reviews where somebody leaves a name like this pizza sucks or whatever as part of their review. And Google has a real hard time with that. I don't know why. This gives them a little more control over these names because an alias is a lot easier to get rid of rather than a fundamental key to their system, which is the username, right?
Yeah, but I mean, people who are going to create those anonymous usernames are still going to create those.
Right. But they may be easier for Google to get rid of rather than an actual user in their system.
Because they're going to say you have to have a real ID, effectively a real ID for your profile, and then you can create the nickname. You can't have a
You can create a
nickname as your
nickname, and
profile.
it's also from a technical point of view going to be easier to get rid of an alias than it is to get rid of a
Right,
fundamental
but you have to force
tracking
people.
data.
But you have to force people out of this nickname creation at the profile level into this alias.
Right. Which, like I said at the beginning, this product could be deprecated long before the normal user learns about this feature.
Well, and if it's a cool feature and something they want people to use, why bury it? Why make it 5 clicks down? Why do that? I mean, why? It's just, dare I say, it's lame on multiple levels.
It is
All
lame
right.
on multiple
So
levels. I
let's
don't think it's going
let's
to have a huge impact one way or the other,
yeah,
I
yeah,
guess
yeah.
is my
So let's
assessment of it.
so let's let's talk about ads in AI mode, and then we'll talk about Gemini 3 and the kind of implications of Gemini 3. So I encountered, I don't have this teed up. I was doing some searches in AI mode, which I don't use consistently. I sort of periodically check in on it and do some things. And I did a search for HVAC repair in San Francisco, or 94611, which is my zip. I don't remember the precise query. Oh, and it gave a couple of names, and it had this sort of text presentation, which I don't, you know, there's instability about when the pictures appear and when they don't. So sometimes you just get text, sometimes you're getting pictures. In this particular instance, I scrolled to the bottom of the result, and there were two ads. They were not LSAs. They were sort of two um, conventional text ads. I mean, although there was some, I think there was a image. I think there were images in both.
Were there reviews in it? Or is it like a local
No
asset
reviews.
ad? No reviews.
No reviews. Yeah, there are certain categories of ads that are eligible to appear in AI mode. LSAs is not one of them at this point. But anyway, so these ads were down at the bottom. There were two ads. They were sort of nondescript. They didn't stand out in any particular way beyond the fact that they were ads and this was new. And it sort of signals the beginning of this sort of introduction of ads across these AI mode results. There'll be product ads and product queries, and then services, presumably in service queries results. Beyond the fact that this is now Google's introduction of ads here that they've been promising for a long time, what struck me is that all the way at the bottom, and as bland as they were visually, they're not going to get any clicks. People are not going to click on those ads. There's no reason to. So Google is going to need to bring LSAs into the mix. They're going to need to create new ad units or modified ad units that are more appealing visually and more interesting, and or they're going to need to put them much more prominently in the results themselves, either at the top or interstitially. And I suspect the sort of, I don't know what to call it, the module that we get on the right, that has sources that you can sort of click into. That's going to be a prominent place for ads, I suspect, at some point. So let the enshittification begin. But Google will need to do more with the ads to make those ads appealing to people to make them click. Now, if AI mode does a much better job of getting intent right and matching ads to intent beyond sort of the category level, maybe people will click on them because they're much more targeted, although I can't imagine what that
And
exactly looks
according
like.
to Google, people are more engaged with Google than they've ever been. And thus,
Engaged meaning longer queries.
right,
Yeah.
longer queries, more frequency, at least some amount of users. And that's what they laid their increased ad revenues to this quarter, was this increased engagement.
Well, that's
So
not
more
entirely
searchers, more searches. We know some of that cooking the books, but they don't need many ads to make a lot of money. They have such a big search dominance and search presence.
right. And they're doing a lot of things, as we've discussed before at some length, to confuse users about what is an ad and what is not an ad. Darren Shaw found an interesting experiment that they're doing where they put a gray background behind the ad pack at the top of the page, which has the single mention of sponsored results, and the rest of them are not tagged. And then the local pack both had a gray background. They used to have differentiated color backgrounds on ads that they eliminated, and this would be sort of a return to that. But it's interesting that they did this also to the local pack. I think it's a experiment that's not going to survive, but they're doing things all the time to draw attention to their ad units in a way that motivates people to click as opposed to avoid them. Google uses its monopoly position to compel advertisers to advertise, and that's the case with LSAs. And LSAs, as we've discussed many times, fixed at the top of the page, compelling presentation, really very little distinction between the LSAs and the pack from a user perspective, and so they're driving a ton of clicks.
Well, the
with those.
distinctions that are there make the LSAs more attractive than
Yes.
the pack in
Right,
certain
but I mean,
verticals.
but what I'm speaking about is the difference between an obvious ad and organic content, which people tend, 9 out of 10 people will ignore the ad and choose the organic content when it's very clearly distinguished and easy to understand. Okay, so let's, and so one of the things that Google did this week is that they rolled out Gemini 3, which is getting a lot of early favorable feedback, sending Google stock up. And one of the hallmarks of this release is that they put it immediately into AI mode, as opposed to sandboxing it somewhere else and then gradually rolling it out. So it's now in AI mode already. Another incentive to use AI mode, and it has a number of noteworthy features. I mean, I'm not going to speak about the coding and all the sort of developer side features, but from a user perspective, it's supposed to be smarter and better, but they have this feature of a kind of dynamic UI where they can create kind of interactive tools or displays or animations depending on the query and the question. And so there's more dynamism in the user interface, which is an interesting thing. I haven't seen it yet, but I've seen the videos and the demos that show
Right.
that.
So, which creates this whole interesting dynamic in the SEO world where,
Yes.
certainly rank tracking has fallen somewhat out of favor. David has talked a lot about using the actual search results to see what Google is presenting on a certain type of query, in addition to rank tracking to help you understand. But this could dramatically change that. Given the non-deterministic nature of AI, you could do a transactional local query and get one interface one day and get a totally different interface the next day. And then you would be personalized on top of it. I mean, literally, with mobile, Google was able to individualize results without violating privacy in theory with mobile because they delivered the results based where you were located.
Right,
But now, in
location.
addition to location based variation, you're going to have personal variation. You're
Right.
going to have interface variation. There will be no two search results that are ever the same, making tracking and monitoring almost impossible.
I think that one of the challenges here is while that I mean, we have to see how prevalent it is. I mean, I think it's not clear that this is going to be true every single time, but let's assume that there's a fairly high degree of variation depending on the vertical and the query and so on and so forth. That may be useful and valuable in many instances, but it will also be potentially disorienting to the user. One of the reasons why people are so attached to Google is because of their comfort level with it, right? It's familiar. They know how to use Google. They know where things are. It's very deeply ingrained in their experience of the internet. If there's a lot of novelty in the presentation of results, that will be a problem for people because it will, suddenly, where is the button? Where is the thing that I'm comfortable for? Where's the module that I'm comfortable with? Where is the module that I'm looking for? I think that Google is probably mindful of that, and there's going to be some balance between consistency.
Although the current interface wouldn't indicate that, even though they're mindful of it, that they're particularly sensitive to the design outcomes of it,
Well,
right?
that's the complacency of the monopolist, right? Even though they're sort of innovating and throwing a lot of spaghetti at the refrigerator, taking the user for granted is part of the monopolistic mindset. We've got all these people, they're going to use us no matter what. We can do whatever the hell we want, and they're not going to abandon us. And for a brief shining moment from November of 2022 until now, Google was scared shitless by ChatGPT, and I think they no longer are. And so they're back to, we're going to do
Well, they got
whatever we want.
a monopoly decision that basically was a slap on the wrist and said that ChatGPT was their competition. So therefore they could do what they wanted. I mean, yeah, they're giving carte blanche there. I mean, I think in the big picture, the 5-year picture, I don't like to look out 5 years because that's just,
Too unpredictable.
it's too unpredictable. But from my point of view, businesses need to be thinking in terms of what's now being called zero Google, where Google no longer can be counted on. Google search can be counted on to send traffic to your site. And you need to be thinking about how you're going to navigate that change, whether it's YouTube and Reddit and email and your own forums and, better ties with your own customers. All of those things you need to figure out, because this Gemini and AI mode portend a disruption in search that may, I mean, clearly they'll still
Well,
be advertising, but it portends a change in search that means that you'll no longer be able to build a SaaS business on Google's search delivery, right? I mean, those
right, for
kinds of
sure.
things.
I mean, people have been talking about building your brand using other channels for a while, and I think that this makes it worse. I mean, there's a lot of talk about, is Google AI mode just simply going to be the future of the search interface versus other things? And I think it's not. I think ads are an obstacle for Google that they have to address. They can't reinvent the search experience entirely because of ads. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, but we're not going to simply see AI mode become Google. I think it will be contained to some degree. I think AI overviews as they currently exist probably go away, and AI mode becomes the thing at the top of the page that is a more robust version of AI overviews that people learn to interact with. And I think it's really supportive of your thesis that whatever, Google zero, traffic zero, ground zero, Coke zero, whatever we're going to call it, you're right that click-throughs are further diminished. And if that top of the page unit becomes more valuable than it is today, the AI overview module, more and more people will engage with it, and fewer people will use the traditional organic results. And the way you're going to have to drive clicks is through ads. And there'll be occasional click-throughs to websites. And we've talked a lot about how for local, because of GBP, it's not as important because ultimately people are contacting the business or going to the business. But still, it's a problem for everybody, I think, for
Right.
all digital
And it's a
marketers.
problem for, as we talked about in the green room, for ChatGPT as well.
Yes,
I
yes.
know
I
you have
mean,
some thoughts on this.
ChatGPT had a big lead over Gemini, which was a crappy tool and a crappy experience for a very long time. And it has gotten better and better and better. You and I may disagree about where it is relative to ChatGPT, but it is now at some level of parity and, better in some respects that are technical that, except for speed, ordinary people won't pay attention to.
Speed is a big issue.
Speed is a big issue. Although Gemini 3 is very slow. Gemini 3 is very
Right.
slow.
Right. But
I
they
mean,
said
when you're
Gemini
doing
3, I think you mentioned this in your newsletter, Gemini 3 was always going to be used for more complicated questions, right?
right,
And
there's not going to
so,
be any manual selection. It's going to be
right.
the machine will determine which system to use, and if you're asking a more complicated question, it'll go to Gemini 3, which takes a very long time to produce a result versus normal AI mode, whatever we call that, 2.5 Flash or whatever it is. But I do think, to your point about the antitrust remedies, which are still in process. We had the default search trial and remedies that were announced. The ad tech remedial trial portion is still kind of going on, but the trial court in the default search matter chickened out very tepid remedies that it imposed, using ChatGPT as a kind of justification for that. Oh, well, AI is competition for search, and that means that Google is, has its bona fide competitors. But what Google has done, which is what the DOJ feared. I mean, Google, to its credit, Google has improved Gemini, and Gemini is much better and much more competitive. But it is using all its channels, all its existing dominance, all its monopolistic tools to get people to use Gemini instead of ChatGPT, or to claw back usage from ChatGPT, and thus consolidate its position as the dominant consumer-facing AI experience. And it's on the cusp of doing that. And that's very depressing to me, because all the abuses, all the stuff that we talk about their indifference to customer service and the fate of individual businesses, and their sort of sporadic attention to fraud, and their ability to force people to advertise because they are this monopoly, that will all just transfer over to that'll just continue and
Well,
arguably get
fraud is
worse.
an income channel, right? As we saw with Facebook,
You're right,
the reality
10% or
was
whatever it is,
10% of their
10%.
income. I mean, it certainly I don't know if it's as big a role with Google, but fraud certainly is a lucrative area for Google, and has been over the years.
Well, I mean, it in the context of LSAs, that's absolutely the case. So many of those top LSA advertisers have some degree of review fraud going on because of their enormous volume of reviews and the sky high ratings that they all display. And that's either review gating or review buying, or a manipulation of people who've left negative reviews are bribed to rescind them or modify them, whatever the combination of tactics. That's where it shows up in a very explicit way, I think, for Google, and they're getting a ton of money from those. I mean, Gemini 3 as a user experience is pretty good from my point of view. I still prefer ChatGPT, but as you point out, the speed factor, the inertia of just using Google. I mean, I did a presentation for seniors yesterday at a senior center in my area. It was kind of an introduction to AI. And, seniors are not the entire market, but a lot of them, some of them really like the AI stuff. And a lot of them thought, just get this out of my email. I don't want this stuff in my email or in my experience. They found it to be clutter and unwanted kind of an intrusion into things that they were accustomed to. Now, if we talk to Gen Z or Gen Alpha or whatever, we would potentially have very different reactions to some of that material. But Google is forcing these things, and Microsoft too, to a lesser degree, is forcing these things on users because they want to bolster their competitive position vis-a-vis somebody else in the market. And they're trying to sort of create these new habits in an almost involuntary way in some cases.
We live in
Interesting times, as they
interesting
say.
times, as they say.
All right. So just to recap, some of these things are quite valuable. I mean, the Ask Maps tool and the Know Before You Go, I think that information is very, very useful. There was an interesting press release. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head that Amazon put out about the use of its AI assistant Rufus, which I actually quite like, where you can just ask questions about a product page. What is this made out of? What are the complaints? Does it have this feature or that feature? I like the ability to go straight for that. And I think those kinds of experiences are quite valuable, but they abstract the user up and the content up a layer. And they make everything below that, the product details, the reviews, essentially data for the AI experience. And I think, that's what we're going to see in search a lot.
Right. And we're seeing it like in life. The idea that we can move from a deterministic existence where we know what the parking is going to cost, we know what the price of an item is. We're moving to a probabilistic existence where AI is driving all of these things, including shelf pricing. I mean, from my point of view, this is a society that's going to be hard to navigate as, for example, dynamic pricing hits the food shelves, right? They do some facial recognition. They understand your income. They understand your tastes. And all of a sudden, the Goya chickpeas, which I favor, are more expensive for
You,
me.
is that the only brand of chickpea in your market?
No, it's the only brand that I will buy. I don't, I find them to be the most flavorful chickpeas.
Yeah, their politics are not particularly
Yeah, I
desirable.
get it, but I don't find that my
You like
purchases affect politics that much. So.
well, you could get dried chickpeas and make them at home.
Yeah,
Dehydrated beans.
I've tried it and I've been unable to match the flavor of the Goya chickpeas. So that's not an
All right.
experiment I haven't done. I have done it. You can do it in a slow
Yeah.
cooker, but
So
it
this
takes.
this
But
brings
anyways,
to it. Yes.
the idea that our society will become probabilistic as a reflection of AI everywhere
Well, or
is a
or 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 highly, highly, highly personalized according to as much data as they can sort of get and use to impact
maybe you
your.
just need to look sad when they do the facial recognition so they give you a cheaper price.
Just pull your pockets out, see, there's nothing in there. Well, I think that when Delta made that announcement, people went, as you would say, ape shit. And I think there'll be attempts to regulate dynamic pricing, but that doesn't mean that your data are not going to be used in all kinds of ways to try and extract more money from you at every turn. I mean, the justification is we're going to provide you with a better experience. It's going to be more personalized, and you're going to get lots more value out of it. But the reality is, we will use your data to try and get as much from you as we can. But anyway, on that semi-dystopian note, we bring to a conclusion another exciting episode of the Near Memo. And this week brought to you by Goya Chickpeas, of course. And next time, I think I don't remember who our next guest is. That we have Guy Sakalakis coming up. We have some interesting guests coming up. We'll be talking about also the sort of future of websites and data in this AI world. And regardless of what you think about ChatGPT's prospects vis-a-vis Google at this point, or anybody else, Claude or Grok or anybody else, Perplexity, Google itself is transforming into one of these AI sites. So all of the stuff that's relevant to these other sites in terms of optimization and so on and so forth will to some degree be part of the Google search optimization conversation going forward. And that's a discussion we'll continue to have. All right. Thank you again for listening. let your friends know, subscribe, do all that stuff. And we have
And
3
on
more.
that note, though, in terms of subscription, we are moving towards a free newsletter.
Oh, yes.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yes. Well, the reality is we tried an experiment. It didn't work as well as we wanted. We appreciate everybody who supported us over the course of this year, but we've decided to make the newsletter free again to make it accessible. There's a lot of people who would like it. So it's going to be totally free. We're moving to once a week. There's also going to be a legal specific marketing newsletter that we're going to be doing that will be monthly. And that is supportive of our private market intelligence program, which is currently focused on legal that involves user surveys and user testing and is yielding a lot of really great data. So if you're interested in those things, go to our site, sign up, or inquire, and we can talk to you about those things. Join us next week when we will have, I believe, Guy Sakalakis is our next guest. I could be
I
wrong
think
about
so,
the
but
sequence.
I don't know.
All right. Well, we will have somebody with us next week. We'll figure out who that is when we get off of this.
Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.